I felt when you had to leave Yugoslavia, it must have been, in a funny way, a great difficulty for you to suddenly be operating in a more open, although also secretively less open, or no more open, but on the surface more open society, in that you had so much you could aim at. You didn't need your metaphor so strongly. How did you cope with that?
I think I became a little disorganized. I became too chaotic for a while. I think that only Montenegro, that became again my film that became organized again, worked much better than Sweet Movie that I did first. And Sweet Movie was really like hitting 100 targets at the same time.
I know. I think it's very interesting that you say that when you'd left Yugoslavia you were chaotic for a time, and that Montenegro is the film which brought everything together again, because although I probably wouldn't have been so offensive as to say so, I think the WR and the other one are absolutely marvellous, and there is a lot of mush in the middle when you were finding your feet in a different society.
Yeah, okay, you are entitled to your opinion. What can I say?
Well, you just said
I
it.
can't, yeah, sure.
Yes. And I think that to readjust to a completely different set of rules, of mores, must have been very, very hard for you.
But I think that that basically because of Hollywood, I think Hollywood is dictating to us more or less how films should speak. Like basic, not vocabulary, but grammar, everything comes from Hollywood. So, among other things, our main thing is that everything should be done through characters. And it has to be characters, it has to be family, it has to be social situations. And even, look at Hollywood movies, even if they are totally fantasy movies, like horror movies or science fiction movies or any Spielbergian film, there is always a family and basic recognizable social unit that serves as a kind of for orientation. And so I think that fables are, or not fables, but anything that is not a strong narration doesn't work well. You know, doesn't work. It's not acceptable. Market doesn't accept it.
No.
But I learned a lot of things. I learned actually from somebody who worked in America. That's Kenneth Anger, from his Scorpio Rising and other films. And I think that some work that I did with editing that I was praised a lot for, like film Innocence Unprotected, and WR, Misters of the Organism too. A lot of devices that I used were used before me by Kenneth Anger.
Could you describe to me how censorship worked in your case in Yugoslavia? Was it simply a question of banning of the film? Was there any threats? What was it in the film, basically, that offended the Yugoslavian state?
Now, they would not confess that they were offended, some people were terribly offended by the way how Stalin was treated. But they would not dare to say that. So they would say that I was offending some high values. Some people even told publicly that I was offending Tito. And then people told them, but look, there is no Tito in the film. They said, well, he was offending Stalin, and Stalin is at least as... It was unbelievable.
Yeah, but they were head-on enemies, or more or less, so it would seem that...
So it was an absolute Kafka situation, but it took me 18 years to get a film okayed, and it's still the last censorship permission that we got, because finally we submitted the film to this another regional censorship, and they said that film is okay because of passage of time, that they considered the film free to be shown at special retrospectives, film libraries.
But not in a normal cinema.
But then it was shown in some normal cinemas, but the film was already, you know, it was 18 years. It was already old.
But do you think that is because time removes the offence from what is
or maybe time changes
time?
Accents. Time, I believe that that film is still offensive, nicely offensive, as I wanted it to be. But also some of the people that film was offending became too old, or they got retired.
Yes.
You know, so like whole generation like moved out. And
it was nearly banned here, you know.
Yeah, I know that there were some kind of very interesting fights, and I remember that when they asked me at the time, in 1971, they said you should not. I remember Phyllis Powell coming to me in Cannes, and I was a young filmmaker, and she comes and says, "Please don't come cut one frame." But one thing that probably helped the censor was that there was a very big fight 4 years before about the film Love Affair, or A Case of a Missing Switchboard Operator. I think the film was known in this country under Switchboard Operator.
Yes, it was.
Now, this film was banned for quite a while, just for frontal nudity, some pubic hair or something. And there was a big fight that was going on and on and on. And then they would let one piece in, and another piece they would still like to cut. And at a certain point, the distributor invited me to come to London and speak to a censor. It was maybe after a year or two, and the film was already successful in Germany and France, and probably they were getting all these clips showing it, the censor saying, look, this film got this International Critics Award, and got this and got that. So I went to see Mr. Trevelyan. It was at Soho Square. And for me, it was quite something, you know, to see a censor, you know, he represents the crown. So, like, that's the man who, like, holds my film in his hands. He can say, yeah, he says yes or no, and I'm dead or alive. And I came already ready to trying to persuade him. So we were talking, and he was explaining to me that he really loved my film. It's a good work, and I'm a good artist. And, you know, with all respect to me, like saying that, unfortunately, public is not as educated. You know, people would come to see it for different reasons. No, I couldn't explain to him, I couldn't say, so what? You know, I think it's up to people to decide for which reasons they would like something and how they're going to behave. You know, I believe that you can see the most romantic film and go and kill yourself if you are in a special mood. So it's not a responsibility of the film Gone with the Wind for certain suicide or something. Anyway, so I tried to explain to him, I said, he explained to me that there is one scene, and it was a quote, 1 minute piece. It was an old blue movie that I quoted in my film. It was kind of old porno movie from Germany from 1910 or something. And I told him that French censor put a black stripe over it. I said, maybe if you put a black stripe, people will still watch the film, they will know what is it, but they will not see offending parts. He says, oh, no, we can't do that. You know, we already had something very, very painful experience. And he said, you know what happened? Suddenly he was telling me the story. So I was listening to the story. He said, you know, he gets the cigarette box, and he draws something, and I look, and he was drawing a naked woman. He said, you know, there was a film with this kind of, you know, there was this naked woman on the screen, and we put a black square. So he draws a little black square over her crotch. It was very funny for me to watch a censor drawing a naked woman. And he said, you know what happened? People were sitting in the theater, and they would go like this, to see. Now, I found it very funny. So like, I don't know what was wrong with people going like this, and why would, like, but for him it was so important. I wanted to quote this story about a despotic king who invited artists to come and do a portrait of him. So they came, and he was asking them, he said, there is only one rule. I want you to do a portrait, and you'll get a lot of gold for that. But if you fail, that you will be punished by death. So it's really, you're risking your lives. Are you ready to do a portrait of me? And nobody dared to say no. And they said, but only thing I ask you is that my portrait must be absolutely accurate. Now, they would not have a problem, but the problem was that he was having a shorter, one leg was shorter, he didn't have one eye, and he was hunchback. So the first artist who was selected to do it, understanding that he has to be exactly, to be accurate, he did exactly what he saw, and then he was killed. So the next one knew that something should be done. So made him absolutely perfect. He had both legs right, and he was straight and tall and beautiful and everything, and he was killed too. So the third one, obviously did some thinking, and got a king in the hunting scene. So there was a tree stump, and the king put his short leg on the tree stump, and he was aiming at the game with his rifle. So he closed one eye, and obviously his hunchback was all right because he was aiming with his rifle. So the whole painting was such that he got a lot of gold and was let free. Now what is interesting is that he was actually not doing anything else but what the first painter did, who was punished by death. So he managed somehow to say the truth and say it in such a way that it was acceptable. So practically I think what a lot of artists do and what art has to do is to find ways, find a balance between telling the truth and not offending, or not offending powers too much.
Yeah, it must be easier to do that in a repressive state than in a state where there are no hard and fast rules, but the rules are unspoken.
Rules are unspoken, but rules are as hard or even harder. Like if you speak of market, if you speak of market as something that is really having their own rules, and you know you have I don't know how do you call this, Nielsen ratings on TV, and like, you know, if people don't buy tickets, you're dead. So these rules are not really naive. They are not written, but you have to entertain. I think that's a very serious rule. You have to be entertaining, or if you're serious, you have to still be articulate enough so that people can understand. I think that philosophy is not prohibited, but you cannot have somebody talking for 10 minutes.